No matter what sector of the film industry you work in, if you're working with a camera, you're probably going to need to know how to use lighting if you want your work to stand out. But just because we have so many affordable, high quality options these days doesn't make learning the fundamental principles any less important, because bad lighting is often worse than no lighting at all, and nothing screams amateur work like bad lighting. And since no one wants that, I decided to ask Patrick O'Sullivan, aka the Wandering DP, for some simple tricks for how to not suck.
The easiest light to do is the key light. So often people think, oh, you start with the key light and you set that wherever you want. That's wrong.
And if you know anything about Patrick, you'll know he's one of the most no-nonsense people on the internet, to say the least. So these aren't fluff tips like use a pro mist filter or buy bigger lights. These are fundamental principles that apply no matter what you're shooting, even with a minimal kit. But in this video, we're not just going to talk about it. I'm actually going to show you what he's talking about step by step using affordable prosumer gear so you can put theory into practice and up your lighting game this year. So if you missed my last conversation with Patrick, or you don't already know him from the Wandering DP podcast, he's a commercial cinematographer with almost 2 decades of industry experience. His podcast is fantastic, so you should definitely give that a listen, and his YouTube tutorials always remind me that there's levels to this game when it comes to lighting. And even though I'm rarely setting up like 20 by overheads or working with the kind of large scale setups that he does, that's not what this video is about. It's about simple things you can do without spending a fortune that will get you like 80 or 90% of the way there, which is just about perfect for most people out there and will easily put you in the top percentile of shooters who aren't working on multi-million-dollar commercials or Dune 3. Because this is a documentary focused channel, and because most filmmakers will need to shoot a million of these things over their careers, we're going to use a sit-down interview frame to demonstrate these concepts in action. And if you're wondering where we are, since I personally don't like watching lighting videos where people are setting up in these like incredible industrial warehouse spaces that don't really reflect real-world shooting environments, I decided to shoot this video in a tiny rented basement apartment, so hopefully you can see that you don't need a crazy location to make this stuff work. Okay, so let's start out with the gear, because there are a few basic tools that you'll need to build your lighting kit around. And even though commercial DPs like Patrick often have access to a ton of stuff, most people don't need nearly that much.
We just did a travel job where we couldn't take anything. There was no rental houses where we were going. We had to take everything carry-on. So it's like the bare minimum that you could take, and there was one in lighting on a commercial flight. It's like, yes, this exact question, what would you do? And ultimately we took like a chip on board, like a little aperture, I forget what it was, 300 or something. So versatile, so many things you can do with that lamp, and so easy, so small now. And you put that through a 6x, and what you just have a piece of fabric, a 6x or an 8x. What I would do if I was all by myself is I would get an 8x. You can easily make it a 6x, right? You can make that thing bigger or smaller. I would take the exact same thing with neg, which is the cheapest thing that you'll ever buy, that I would use more than anything else, would just be an 8x8 piece of duvetine. That's it. You hang that thing or you tape it to the wall. It will give you more shape than any other lighting equipment that you could possibly do. If you gave me the choice between, you could have an entire truck full of lights and no neg for a job, or you could have all the neg that you wanted, all of the black pieces of fabric that you wanted, for sure, every time, no questions asked, doesn't matter the location, doesn't matter where we are, doesn't matter what we're doing, I'm choosing the neg every time. Because again, I could set the ambient to whatever I wanted. So I would say neg would be the biggest one.
All right, so that was pretty interesting and hopefully inspiring to know you don't need massive quantities of gear to get good results. Patrick mentioned an aperture 300D, so that's what we'll use here. But I also really liked how important he said fabrics were for him. And since fabrics are way cheaper than lights, it's a really cost-effective way to build out your kit and get better results. And just in case you didn't understand the jargon, when he says a 6x6 or an 8x8, he's talking about the size of the fabric in feet. So here I have a few different 6x6 options. I have a half stop and a full stop, different thicknesses, and we'll use those to diffuse our key light. Mine are made by Westcott, and they're a great option, but there are lots of companies who make fabrics, so just go whatever's available in your area or that fits with your budget. On the extreme budget end, you could even use a big shower curtain, though you might not want to rock up to a big job with that. And I couldn't agree more with him about how useful negative fill is for the price. And by neg fill, we're just talking about pieces of black fabric. Again, I've got a few more options here in different sizes, also from Westcott, but you can also just buy felt from a fabric store, and it's more or less the same thing. Proper fabric like this does soak up light a bit better, but if you don't have the budget for it, just get chunks of felt and it should be pretty cheap. Okay, so we've got a key and some fabrics, but what else does he recommend for lights and tweaking the background?
And then I have found lately on every single job that I'm using, because the times are getting quicker and everyone's expecting faster and cheaper and better. I can't remember the name of the company that makes it, but every LED manufacturer makes them. They are like the little source 4 ellipsoidal attachments that you will put on these little lights, and it doesn't have to be super punchy. Because what you're using it for, say you have the 600D, and say you're going to do an interview. You're going to do the 600D through the 6x. That's your base level. That's your key level that you're using. You put just off of set, wherever around the set, you just put this thing into, it used to be you had to do it with like a source 4, and you had to punch it into like a white card or something like that, like an old David Mullen back in the Red User days. This was his idea. Now you can just push this thing, which has these little cutters on it. You can make it any little narrow size, and that is like
a spotlight attachment.
Yes, that is like your ambient. Yeah. You can use it as an ambient tool, which is what I would use it for, like a room fill tool, or you can use it for like a little edge light or a slash in the background. Or again, that's that quick like little, how do I add salt and pepper? Boom, bring out the little source 4. Bring out the little, I don't know the actual names that they use for them. That's what I call for. Put it in the background, like add a little slash, just hit a little plant, use it as a backlight. They're super tiny now, right? You need like a 60-watt version. You don't need, some giant thing. This is just for like a little, we got the key, we got it balanced to the ambient. Now we need like a little salt and pepper. So I would say that would be that would probably be first. I'd probably get that before I got the bigger key light.
Now, honestly, that's not something I was expecting to hear, because often when we think about lighting gear, especially on big commercials, the first instinct is to jump to things like cases of Titan tubes or sky panels and bigger single source lights, or maybe even giant LED mats that you hang from the ceiling. But Patrick is actually suggesting that you think way smaller than that. And when he says source 4s, in case you've never heard of them, he's really just talking about smallish lights with spotlight attachments that are really easy to shape and control. He's using it in a generic sense, obviously, because the brand doesn't really matter. What matters is that this ability to shoot in controlled beams of light so you can shape the light is possibly the most important light in his view. Like maybe he'd even go something like that before the key light, he said, which is really interesting. I might push back on that a little bit if you're doing a lot of run and gun stuff, because a good interview key light is extremely helpful. But as a second choice, I really like it. Now, I don't have source 4s, but I do have these little Aperture 60Xs, and then they have their spotlight attachment, and it's essentially the same thing for what Patrick's talking about, and quite a bit cheaper than the source 4s as well. These are going to allow us to really quickly shape the light into almost any pattern we want, and we can even drop in little Cucalores filters to replicate things like leaves or blinds or whatever. He also mentioned a bit later in the conversation, which I cut out, that having a couple of Aperture MCs to throw around was very useful, so I have a few of those as well. So now we've got all the gear we need for a basic starter kit according to Patrick, but why are all these small lights so important in his view? I decided to ask him this from a kind of different angle, and instead asked him what he thought made bad lighting, and here's what he said on that.
I would say with no intention or with no shape. So anytime you get flatness, areas of the image that have the same tonal value, that's a negative to me. I always say in the podcast on my own channel, it's like you want salt and pepper across the frame. And the easiest way to see this, if you're just starting out, the easiest way to see if the image is interesting, not the production design, not the art direction, but the actual lighting, if it's of interest and draws the viewer in, is to defocus your eyes. Blur your eyes and look at the monitor. If you can't see light and dark and light and dark and areas of contrast, you're doing something wrong. It is not going to look nice. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be makeup, cereal, it could be a portrait, it could be anything. If it doesn't look like that, it's going to be flat. And if it's flat, it's boring. Now, if you're going for boring, congratulations. If you're not, then you need to change it. You need to add a highlight. You need to take away some light somewhere. You need to find those pockets. And the more that you can fit that into the image, it's like, well, you can't go crazy, right? You can't have things everywhere. No, yes, you can. Yes, you can. And it's only going to look thicker. It's like the thing that constantly we talk about in higher end cinematography is the thickness of the image. It's like how many of those little dots can you create? How many areas of tonal range can you create inside of an image? Because the more that you add in there, the more interest it's going to be, the more shape that you get out of things, because that shape is created with that contrast. So you need that. So I would say those little specks are the best way to do it. And to defocus your eyes is the easiest way to see it. Like the quick check. Is it boring? How do I know? Defocus your eyes, look at it. Is it all one thing? If it is, boring.
So that does make a lot of sense when you put it that way. If the goal is to really play with those patches of light and dark, then having smaller lights that can be tightly controlled in the background would be way more useful than another huge light. Now I'm almost ready to put all this stuff into practice and actually give it a try. But first I wanted to ask him about one of the classic rookie moves, which is overlighting. Sometimes when you have a bunch of lights to play with, your natural instinct is that you really need to make sure people know you had them. So you turn things up to the point where you can kind of really see them working, maybe a bit like this light at the moment. But often that's the wrong approach. Really good cinematography should look natural and motivated. So I asked Patrick how he makes sure not to overlight.
Yeah, in my mind, this is super simple, but you have to do the work for it to be super simple. As soon as you do the work one time, it's very, very easy. And this is where you can get super technical and you can figure it out on your own just with a light meter. When I think of overlighting, I think of like the spotlight effect, where I think the ambient of the space is not matching what you're doing with the key light in the foreground. So you're either too bright on the key light compared to the ambient, which is a very easy fix, or the ambient is too high and your key light too low. It's like that mix. So how do you do that? Because it's a worry. It's a worry when you start out. You're like, oh, it does feel like, I don't know, there's a 6x6 with like a sky panel through it, just offset. Like, why does it feel lit? It's because it doesn't match the rest of the frame. It doesn't matter. Like, the easiest light to do is the key light. So often people think, oh, you start with the key light and you set that wherever you want. That's wrong. When you're working in cinematography, you set the camera and all of the settings and all of the look, you set to what you can't control. If you cannot control the ambient in the room, you have to decide, before you put up the key light, you have to decide, what is the ambient that I want in the room? How much background light do I want? Once you do that, then you blend in the key. You blend in the key to what you can't control. Why? Because you can control the key. If you're doing like a documentary interview and you're going to put up an aperture with a little like dome on it, it's very rare you're going to run that at 100%. If you're running that at 100% and then you set everything else in the background, or you set the camera to that, it's going to look really strange. Set the background, set that how you want with your stop, with your ND, with all of that stuff, and then come in and blend the key light. Do not do it the other way, or else it's going to start to feel lit.
All right, so that was a really useful way to look at that. You don't make the key light the starting point. You make the ambient space your starting point, and then you light to that. I mean, you can even kind of see him doing that in his talking head setup. It feels balanced and natural, even though there's a lot of lighting going on there. All right, so we've got the theory from Patrick. Now let's put it all into practice. We've purposefully picked a pretty dull location here, which is not what I might do on a professional shoot, but I think it's more useful for this test than shooting in a big warehouse or something like I said. So let's get the camera set up and give it a try. All right, so we've got a basic interview frame set up, and don't worry, this is not what the room looks like. We're lighting me right now, so this video looks a little bit better, but we've got a basic frame that I think looks pretty good. And according to Patrick's rules, the very first thing we want to do is expose for the space. So right now it's extremely dark looking. I'm gonna first turn on all the practicals and then have a look at what the room looks like. And then I'm going to adjust my exposure without any subject in the frame until I think we're exposed properly for this space. And then we'll get Hank in the chair and then bring in the key light. A lot of times the instinct is to start with something like this and then just whack up a key light, get it to a point that you think looks good, and then start rolling. Where Patrick's approach, where you light for the room first and then light to that, is going to help a lot when it comes to avoiding overlighting and that sort of spotlight, unnatural looking effect. So yeah, we'll turn on all the practicals, see what the room's giving us, and then go from there. Okay, so these are all the possible practical lights. I'm not too crazy about the one in the far background. We might lose that, but these other two are kind of interesting. The problem is in the frame right now, the space is overly lit. It's too bright, right? We've got these highlights. So I'm going to apply a little bit of ND to bring things down, and I'm going to dial it in until I feel like the practical lights look natural but aren't blowing out. So I think that's pretty good. I mean, obviously with a bare, naked, exposed light bulb like we have in the top corner here, it's gonna be a little overexposed. But in general, that's sort of a soft ambient tone that I like for the room. I'm gonna turn off the back room light and then maybe we'll supplement that instead because I don't really like how much attention it's drawing. But in general, we're getting exposed for the space, which should give us a much better idea of how to set up our key light. Yeah, okay, as a starting point, I think that's pretty good. We'll have to do a lot of set deck, but we've got a natural environment that looks pretty good. So let's get our key light set up. We'll tear down this light dome we're using to light me right now and instead get up a 6x6 piece of diffusion and shine a 300D through it and then start tinkering until we get something that looks natural. Most overkill possible stand for this tiny little light, but the other advantage to using a separate piece of diffusion fabric instead of the light dome is when you have the light dome on this, it balloons out. So in a really low space like this is about as high as we can get the light versus once we use diffusion fabric, we can get the light right up to the ceiling. So in some ways it's a bigger footprint, but in other ways a bit of a smaller and more versatile one. So just something to keep in mind. Where's the 300D? Oh, there. So we're going with a full stop 6x6 piece of diffusion. There's a lot prettier ways to do this. We're just trying to do this quick and cheerful and cheaply. So we're hanging it off of one C-stand and then I'm just gonna tape it to the ceiling. It doesn't have to be pretty, it just needs to work. That may come tumbling down. Normally I would not stick gaffer tape onto people's paint. This place smells so strongly of old cigarettes and this ceiling is so ugly that I don't think it's gonna make a difference, but normally not the best idea. Need the focuser. All right, so we've got Hank in the chair, we've got the light set up coming through the 6x6, so let's turn it on, and right off the bat you can see how little power we need. That's 10%, and to me that's way too much. And this is sort of the danger when you light with the key light first, is that maybe you get it looking good at 20%, but then the rest of the background to compensate is going to be really, really bright or underexposed or whatever. But by starting with the background first, now we can dial in this light until it blends and is believable as natural within the context of this space. Maybe around 8%, I'm kind of liking that look. I kind of want to always be underhanded with my lighting. I don't want I don't want there to ever look like somebody set up a video light. So ideally, people are going to believe that this light source is coming from that other second window over there. Pretty subtle. I think 8% is about right for now, and we'll adjust as need be. So if this is generally working as a key light, the next step, according to Patrick, is to really focus on that salt and pepper textured background, creating those differing areas of contrast and brightness. He suggested defocusing my eyes, and right off the bat, just because of these practicals and this window in the background and how dark the space is in general, we already have some of that naturally occurring, right? We've got, the darkness right behind Hank's head, we've got the darkness of the back room, and then we also have these bright spots of the lamp and this little light bulb up in the corner. But I think we can do a lot better than that, and so we're gonna spend the next 25, 30 minutes or so moving things around, doing a bit of set deck, and then adding in some splashes of color to accentuate what's already there. And hopefully in the end we get a lot more of that salt and pepper effect that Patrick was so big on. We'll start with a couple of things, the Aperture 60Xs and the spotlight attachments, and then we'll add a bunch more smaller lights as need be. We're not going to try and spend too much time. My goal is to get this whole setup done in sort of an hour, which is, I could easily spend 6 hours tweaking an interview setup like this. So we're gonna try and move pretty fast. We're not trying to get it, chef's kiss perfect. We just want it to be 80 or 90% of the way there so you can see the fundamental skills at work. looks long, but the whole thing is actually, you know, we're just on a basic light stand here, so it's really not that heavy. And this is gonna give us a lot of power. Try and get it off the painting. See how that happens. So really what I'm trying to do here is help motivate this light in the sense that the room is really dark and quite orange, right? But we're hitting our subject with this large daylight balanced key light, and it's kind of really at odds with the rest of the room. So what I'm trying to do with the spotlight is throw some more daylight, so the same temperature as our key light, in the same general direction, and fill in some of the dark spots with the same quality of light from the same angle, so that the viewer accepts without really thinking that there is a light source over here and it's filling up part of the room, even though it's really only casting this artificial light on his face. I've used the shutters on the spotlight to create a really narrow beam in the back corner, and I've sort of blocked it off really carefully. You couldn't do this without a spotlight attachment. You can literally just move these shutters in any combination of angles to create any sort of rectangle, square, triangle, whatever you need to do. And then into that, so that it's not just a blast of light, I'm going to use these Cucaloris inserts, which are just basically little discs. I mean, in the past you used to do this with big frames. There's any number of ways to do it, but you're putting a pattern in front of the light basically so that the pattern breaks up a little bit. I think for what we're doing, we're just gonna go for a sort of tree pattern. So I'll take this foliage disc, drops into the spotlight, and then that just changes the light from being just a solid rectangle of white to having a bit of spots, as if there was some sunlight shining down through some trees and then coming through the window. So take a look at the monitor and see how it came out. Yeah, so as I turn it on and off, we're just at about 10%, and it's really subtle. You don't necessarily even notice it, but before, with it off, it's just sort of this dark hole, and with it on, there's this little accent of light that is balanced to our key, so hopefully it makes the viewers think that this is a natural light source. So I'm gonna leave that for now and move on to the second spotlight and see if I can add a little bit of hard light into this, this corner here, because it's kind of looking a little dark for my taste. Okay, so with the second spotlight, we decided to just narrow it right down and put some hard light onto this little plant, as if some sunlight was coming through the window and hitting it. So basically just continuing this illusion that there's a lot more daylight coming into this room than there really is. So if I turn it on and off, it's quite subtle, but it does hint at a sun coming from this side of the frame, which is what we want. So bringing it all together, and that would not have been possible with any other light source. I mean, we have that narrowed down so much, and we found just the right angle so that it doesn't throw any shadows onto the door frame or any other part of the scene. So without a spotlight, that would have been impossible. All right, so the frame's looking pretty good so far. I mean, we're trying to get this done quick. I'm just gonna run around and try a couple of MCs, like little pocket lights in different places, see if we can add just a little bit more texture, and then we'll wrap it up. So pretty subtle with those little MCs. I just used 2 of them, and I could do this all day. We could be here for hours and hours, but we're trying to keep this to an hour-long setup, so we're gonna wrap it up. But we took 2 of the MCs and put one in the back room at a really cold temperature, again, to sort of emphasize this contrast between cold and warm. So that one is at 6,500 Kelvin, I believe, and it's just sort of lighting up the bed a little more and that back wall. It's very subtle, you probably don't even notice it, but if I turn it on and off, yeah, it's definitely doing something, and I like it a little bit. And then beyond that, we added a second one here on the couch, and it is at 4300, so a mixture of daylight and tungsten, and it's just throwing a little bit of definition into these pillows. When I turn that one on and off, it just sort of reads as light from the lamp, but it just sort of warms up the whole thing, and yeah, I like it. So that is the frame with everything off. We started with the room and we exposed for what it was giving us, which is these practicals and that light in the background. So super dark. So then we brought in our 6x6 full stop piece of diffusion fabric and an aperture 300D as our key. And that's currently set to 8%. So not very powerful at all. We could probably have used an even smaller light than that, but sometimes it's nice to have the extra power. After that, we have our first spotlight, which is filling in the back corner with a bit of a daylight effect and a tree pattern cuculoris. And then we have our accent light on the plant, and then our first MC in the back room to give a little brightness, and the second MC on the couch. So yeah, all in all, for a 1 hour-ish setup with not that much gear. I know it looks like a lot, but I guess I mean not a lot in terms of high-end pricing. Probably all this stuff costs less than one RE Sky panel. So pretty economic, pretty possible to get this kind of kit together. Definitely an investment, but with 3 lights and 2 small pocket lights, can really transform an incredibly boring space. And I think without following this system of Patrick's, like if I had just come in here with a light dome too, shone it straight on their face, and then not done much to the background, I think it would have been kind of bland looking. So yeah, really, really cool. So the last thing we're gonna do is a little out of order, but for a couple of reasons, we waited till the end to put up the neg fill, and that was one of Patrick's most valuable tools, and I would agree with that. We're gonna put it on the darker side of the face to stop any reflections. The reason we're doing it at the end is, one, this is a tiny space, and with another huge piece of fabric in the way, we would not have been able to move around at all. And two, it's kind of interesting to see the effect once you have all the lights set up. The idea is we're gonna get it as close to his face without coming into the frame, and that should suck up a lot of the extra light coming back and give us even more modeling and contrast on the side of his face. So that took just over an hour of setup time, and I feel pretty good about it. Now, if this was a paid job, I'd probably spend 4 to 5 more hours tweaking it and moving stuff around and taking pictures off the wall and all that kind of stuff that goes into making it perfect. But that's not what this video is all about. We're using all of Patrick's basic principles, and considering how simple it is, this doesn't suck, at least in my opinion. So if you can get to this point by going through the steps, you're gonna be most of the way there to having a base level of lighting that works. And from there, your creativity is the limit. Feel free to let me know how wrong I am in the comments though, as I'm sure someone will. But the point is, this stuff will apply all the way through your whole lighting career, not just for interviews, because it's all the same ideas, just at different scales and contexts. So before we shut this video down, let's go back to Patrick for his take on why learning to light a shot like this is so important, and how you can practice on your own even if you don't have a friend to help you.
I got a used mannequin at some pawn shop. And I did this exact setup that I'm looking at now. Key light, you put in a little edge. It's just a talking head. If you can light this shot, you can light every single shot. There's nothing like extra about, well, what if it's a giant wide shot? This is the same. It's the same concept, the same angle. It might be bigger fixtures, but if you're lighting some big wide shot and it's bigger fixtures, you're not the person responsible for picking the fixtures. You're the person responsible for saying, this is how I want it to look. So if you can light this shot, I would set up this exact shot. And I would say, okay, do I like magic cloth? Do I like quarter grid? What is the difference? If I didn't know that, I would want to know that immediately. That's something that I would want to try in this setup. I want to try the different fabrics, and then all I want to do is try the different ratios, and then I want to try the different angles of the light. Like, do I like the key light here and the backlight on this side? That's a look. Maybe that's not my favorite though. Maybe I like the backlight on the opposite side of the key. Well, if that's the case, now I know. Like we talked about before, like what are the little wins that you can get? That comes back to ratios as well. Like, do I like this background is a little bit too down for me? It's like, well, how much light is actually on the background? If you have a little light meter, you just walk back there and you can measure it, and it's never going to change. Those ratios between the key and the fill, you could be in Tokyo or Mexico City, it doesn't matter. It's always the same forever. You do this exercise one time, you take this knowledge with you forever. This is the job. The entire job is like, this is all you have to be able to light.
So basically, if you can light something like this and understand why it works, everything else you light will be based on the same things, just at a different scale and a different location. So practice this stuff, see what you like, and like Patrick said, keep it with you for your whole career. Now, just before we wrap up, I wanted to ask Patrick straight up the central question of this video. How do you not suck at lighting?
How to not suck ties back into what we said earlier in the conversation, which is actually just doing it. Like, you can theorize and you can learn all the knowledge about it and you can listen to us talk about uplighting and ratios, and but if you don't know what 2 stops under looks like, 2 stops under is the job. If you really like cinematography and you don't know what that means, you're not ready. You have to know that stuff. So you can either do that later in your career, after you spend years trying to fumble around and figure out what looks good, or you can do it right now and then know why something looks good. It's like, that is the difference between someone who actually is a cinematographer and someone who just gets lucky making something look nice. You can just get really lucky and get a great location or a great time of day, and you can send somebody out with a camera and it'll look pretty good, like if they just happen to stand in the right spot at the right time. Or you can know why something looks nice. And the job of the cinematographer is to know why something looks nice. Once you know why something looks nice, then you can tell everybody, including yourself, how to do it.
Couldn't have said that better myself. Hope that video was helpful, and make sure you check out Patrick's YouTube channel because he is one of my favorite filmmaking teachers on the internet, especially when it comes to lighting. See ya.